Hi, Pinchas here. Just wanted to interrupt you. You're going to watch something right now, and it's a recording of a lecture. And I wanted to let you know that this was a lecture recorded live, complete with audience participation. So you will hear people asking questions and interjecting, all sorts of things like that. And so, which is completely normal. That's actually how I love to do lectures. And when you hear lecture, you're probably thinking boring, but trust me, this lecture will probably entertain you just a little bit, probably might challenge you, and I think you'll learn something. So in this segment, what I am doing is I'm asking what is anti-Judaism, what is anti-Semitism? I know, not really fun questions, but how does it all work together and where does it come from? So if you're interested, keep watching.
Whenever we talk about the Bible, whenever we talk about scriptures, how many interpretations do you think there are to a verse? Interpretations, not translations. Yeah, some of them presumably share some of their interpretations. They might overlap. Yeah, we assume.
There's probably not that many if you think about whatever.
Well, we have a saying. We have a saying. Two Jews, minimum 3 opinions, right? So you take it to the rest of the world, it just multiplies over and over and over. So when people interpret the scriptures, there's usually quite a bit of a discrepancy. So what I wanted to talk to you today about, guys, is I'm embarking on a topic that's much larger than actually 2 sessions. I don't know that I couldn't even scratch it in 2 sessions, but I'll give you the best of. I'll give you little cutaways, okay? And I'll stimulate your mind thinking about this because you actually know about this. It's this idea of anti-Judaism.
Is this the Cliff Notes?
Yeah, this is the Cliff Notes. But you know how I normally teach. We look at the theoretical aspect, then we jump into the actual text, and we look at the practical aspect. Because anything that I say, theoretically, conceptually, as an idea, has to have a real life application, real life working out. So what I'd like to do in this series of teaching, actually, is look with you at some of this issue of anti-Judaism as a way of interpreting the scripture. There's an anti-Jewish way of reading the Gospel of John. And I want you to be aware of it. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you have not. Maybe this is the first time you're saying, that, what? There's an anti-Jewish way of reading the Gospel of John? How is that? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. It all depends on your experience. I bumped into it many, many times because I find it to be very common. But I'm just one of those people who's always curious about how people read different passages and how they understand them that way and why they interpret them that way. So there's this idea of anti-Judaism. But then the second question is why the Gospel of John? So if you're curious about the image, this is actually a cover from the Bible. And the 4 images are the representations of the 4 Gospels. There was a guy named Irenaeus, Saint Irenaeus, and he started this really interesting Christian tradition that the 4 Gospels correspond to the 4 creatures in the vision, Ezekiel vision of God's throne. And that's how the Gospels got their creatures attached to them. So now each Gospel has a creature. So, he was biblical, but, he kind of went off there in very interesting directions. So let's talk about this first topic. What is anti-Judaism? If you were to define anti-Judaism, what would you think that is, Kelly?
Anti-Semitism.
Is anti-Judaism the same thing as anti-Semitism?
I would.
You would think it's the same. Anybody else?
Sure.
Dissent?
Well, not necessarily, because I know plenty of evangelicals who are very pro-Jewish and very support Jewish people and so forth, but still have sort of this anti-Judaism idea in the New Testament.
So pro-Jewish but anti-Judaism. Is that possible?
Within a Christian concept.
What do you think?
I'm going to say practically it's anti-rabbis.
It's anti-rabbi, so it's anti-rabbinic Judaism. Okay, so we don't have a problem with Jews, we have a problem with the rabbis now.
Also, we don't have problems with ministers and priests.
We don't have a problem with, okay. But that has nothing to do with it. We're not talking about anti-ministerism.
Right. But it goes back to anti-Semitism.
Okay, so you're still convinced that anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism are really one and the same. What do you think?
I think that anti-Judaism is anti the practice of the Jewish religion, not necessarily a racial
Okay.
thing.
So anti-Judaism has to do with anti-practice of Jewish way of life. Actually, that's what we're talking about. When we say anti-Judaism, we're talking about I am against a way of life and a practice of a religion that we call Judaism. Okay. Now I'll explain to you in just a minute. Because let's answer this question. What exactly is Judaism? If you were to define Judaism, besides the fact that it's a religion, let's put it that way, what is Judaism, conceptually?
Jewish way of living.
Jewish way of living, thank you. That's wonderful. That's exactly the answer I was looking for. Jewish way of living. So that means
Tradition and culture.
traditional way of living. That means mode of life. That means the calendar I follow, the food I eat, the clothes I wear, the songs I sing, the language I speak, everything, my way of living, okay, is my entire way of just going through life. So Judaism essentially is a lifestyle, way of living. And so anti-Judaism, I'm saying I don't agree with the way you live. That's what I'm essentially saying. If we're saying anti-Judaism, I don't agree that the way you live is the way to live. There's a better way to live. Let's put it that way. Okay? So, like anti-capitalism, right? Imagine capitalism is an economical system. So I say, you know what? I'm not a capitalist. I'm anti-capitalist, right? I'm not saying that you are a bad person as a capitalist. I'm just not agreeing with the way you choose to structure your economical life, right? And that's what I'm saying. So we separate the personal from the system which you follow, okay? You follow a system, and I say, I don't like your system. So that's essentially what we're talking about, anti-Judaism. Judaism is a way, a system of life that is all-encompassing. But that's what anti-Judaism is. It's essentially a theological assertion, actually. It's, I don't agree with the way you live because I know for a fact, scriptures tell me there is a better way to live. Okay? That's what theological anti-Judaism. So when was Judaism established? Now, if there is anti-Judaism, right, if it's a real thing, then it has to exist in time. When was Judaism established? It cannot possibly exist before that, right? So when was Judaism, when does Judaism begin? What do you guys think? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's a good answer. That goes way back.
In
What do you
one
guys
sense, yes, but in another sense, Sinai.
Sinai. He goes to Sinai.
So
You
2000.
could say Second Temple Judaism.
Second Temple Judaism. So like say 3rd century before Common Era, something like that. Okay.
I think G.K. Chesterton once said that everything universal is always anonymous.
That's true. I expected that answer from you, which is why I was hesitant calling from you. But okay, so if we're going to talk about Judaism as a concrete way of how Jews understand and express a way to live, okay, we do have Sinai that gives us pretty specific rules, right? But then there's this idea of halakha, right? We were trying to work it out. Well, how do we exactly observe the Sabbath, right? It says, sanctify the Sabbath and keep it holy. Well, how do I do that? So we start that discussion, and that discussion really does not come out in a uniform way until much later. So as has been noticed, we are probably talking about Second Temple period with different groups within Jewish society arise that say, we think the Torah should be followed this way. Other group says, no, we think the Torah should be followed this way. So essentially now you have multiple Judaisms, and there's not really such thing as one Judaism. There's multiple streams, there's multiple divisions, multiple groups that say, we think it's this way, another. And now on some things we agree, right? And on some things we don't agree. We all agree the Shabbat is holy and it should be sanctified. How and to what degree? That's where we disagree, the details, right? But the big picture is, so the big picture, you can call this big picture of the things we all agree on, is Judaism. And whenever that happened in history, which I would say Second Temple period, maybe 1st century, by the time the 1st century runs around, I think most Jews are kind of in agreement of what is Jewish and what is not. What is the right way to live, what is the wrong way to live. They still disagree on exactly how that should express, which is why when Yeshua argues with other teachers of the Torah, he argues over what? Over the how, not over the why. He never argues over the why. Why should we follow commandment? He argues over how it should be followed, how we should adhere to this particular passage in the Torah, how we should interpret it. So that's the idea. So that's essentially when Judaism really becomes something cohesive, something concrete, something that we can all agree on. Okay? Now, second set of questions. Who can espouse anti-Judaism? If you have Judaism at some point in history, right, and we're trying to pin down that historical moment when it comes to be, in order for it to be anti-Judaism, there have to be people who are against that system. Once the system exists, you know, who can possibly be against that? What would you have to be in order to be against Judaism?
Not a Jew.
Not a Jew, thank you. So could possibly Romans be anti-Judaism? Could Greeks express anti-Judaism? Right? And presumably Christians would express anti-Judaism, except when? Right? The question is, when do Christians start to express this idea? Right. Well, actually, quite early on, probably 2nd century and on. But my question I'm asking you again, is anti-Judaism the same as anti-Semitism? If we define Judaism as a way of life, then saying is, I don't agree with how you live or how you organize your life or how you interpret the Torah, is not the same thing as saying, I hate you, I don't like you, you're a despicable human being. See what I'm saying?
Well, like Alfred Edersheim was a Jewish convert to Christianity, and he was very much anti-Judaism.
Right.
He was a rabbi, but he wasn't anti-Jew.
Right, because that would be hating himself.
Exactly.
A little bit of a problem, right? So it's actually be possible to express anti-Judaism and even be Jewish by birth, but not by lifestyle,
Right.
because that's inconsistent. It's like being an anti-capitalist capitalist. You can't be a private property business owner and say, I hate capitalism, it's an awful system. Never should follow it. I should read the, Mao's book or something like that,
Oh no, there are some billionaires who do that once they've got their...
Yeah, once they've got their billions and they just live off the interest in the checking account. Yeah, that makes sense. So, anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, not exactly the same is what I'm trying to say. They're very connected, don't get me wrong. They're married. But they're not exactly the same. It's possible to have one and not the other, is what I'm trying to say to you, okay? So, is anti-Judaism natural to New Testament and 1st century expression of faith that we find it there? Is anti-Judaism natural to the 1st century?
No.
Right, because you could have some people, like Romans and Greeks, right, who are definitely against Judaism. They don't really want Judaism, but they have no reason to bother with Judaism because, well, they got their own thing going on, and Jews are not trying to tell them how to live their life. So just like, all right, let the Jews live like the Jews, and we'll live like we are, and that's fine. The only problem when anti-Judaism really becomes a hot issue is when there's some sort of a competition. When we have a claim to the same thing and we disagree. That's when it really happens. So, is there such thing in the 1st century? Romans don't have a claim to anything Judaism has in the 1st century. They don't care. You can have it. You can have your law of Moses. We don't need it. You have Moses. We have Plato.
We have Olympus.
Right, we have Olympus. We have our own system. So do Greeks want it? No. Do Romans want it? Not really. They're happy with what they have. They're not trying to contend for anything. What I'm trying to tell you is really anti-Judaism really becomes a theological thing, and it becomes an expression in early Christianity when there's a claim for the same turf, claim for the same scriptures, claim for the same prophets, claim for the same words, and all of a sudden they're being interpreted in a different way. All of a sudden, I don't like the way you interpret things. And in fact, I don't like you either. So that's really where it all goes. So it is not pleasant, it is ugly, but it is a historical fact, and we can't deny it. So we have to deal with it because it is the reality in which we live.
So if you're still watching, I probably piqued your interest, and my lecture on anti-Judaism in the Gospel of John is essentially asking some questions. And the question I'm going to ask in this particular segment is why the Gospel of John? What it is in the Gospel of John that lends itself to anti-Judaism. And so if you're interested in that, keep watching. And if you like this content, please hit subscribe button and notification bell so you can stay on top of what's happening on my channel.
So here's a little picture that I wanted to show you. This is an entrance to the Strasbourg Cathedral in France. It was built in 14th century. It is really a magnificent building. It's beautiful. It's a big church. Not yet. I'm not sure we can cover that in this one. But what I want you to realize, you see the two doors, okay? So it's almost like a synagogue. It's kind of cool. You got two doors, two entrances. What I want you to notice is the statues over here on the right and on the left. You can't see them in this picture very well. There are three statues. In the middle, I think, is like something like King David or one of the prophets or something like that. I'm not sure. But the statues on the left and on the right of this building are called Ecclesia and Synagoga. It's actually on many churches, but I'm picking this one because this is a good one. All right? So, art is a wonderful thing. I love art. Art communicates to us in a very powerful way. It communicates worldviews, it instructs us in theology, and essentially, if you look at songs and sculptures and architecture and stained glass windows and paintings, they are textbooks for the illiterate. When you don't know how to read the Bible, how do you learn the Bible stories? You learn them in pictures, right? In stained glass windows, in sculptures. How do you conceptualize the biblical world when you can't read? That's how you do it. So art is powerful, but art doesn't just communicate content. Art communicates theology. Art communicates worldview. It communicates a perspective. So the women that are depicted by those by the entrance on the right and on the left of that particular building, those two women are essentially they visually represent Judaism and Christianity. They represent the church and the synagogue. And what I want you to realize is that church, just the posture, notice the posture. You recognize the church, right? The one on the left. The church displays freedom, confidence, authority. Look at how the church is standing. Upright, chest forward, like very head lifted up. I mean, this is a confident person right there. Just very comfortable standing right there. And look at how the synagogue is standing. She's bent in a kind of awkward way, kind of positioned weirdly, is looking down, hiding something behind her back. You know, we're going to get to it, but I just want you to realize synagogue is showing misery, shame, submission. Like if I was a person, I didn't know anything about it, and I don't even know what those images are, if I just try to figure them out, I'll say, the lady on the left looks happy and proud and confident, and the lady on the right looks very downcast and sad and sorry and unhappy. You know, I don't know why, but this is what it looks like to me. So you see what it's doing, the art is communicating to you a message without even realizing what this art is and what it stands for, what it represents. So as you look at those statues really up close, what you see is the church is triumphant, synagogue is defeated. The church's staff is prominent, the synagogue's staff is broken. The church is royal. The church has a crown on the head. Look at that. A crown on the head. Now the synagogue is not royal. Synagogue is common. No crown. Okay? Church's spiritual ability to see is contrasted with the synagogue's spiritual ability not to see. Blindness. The synagogue is wearing a blindfold. So the church can see clearly, the synagogue can't, because she is blinded by the blindfold she wears. Her staff is broken, her head is down. Again, you look at these statues and you say, what are they saying to me? If I don't even know what these images represent, I'm already walking away with really liking the one on the left and not being so happy about the one on the right. Whatever that means, I'm already being fed this idea. Now, if you keep looking at the statues, there's more. Look at what the church is holding, okay? The Eucharist, the cup, is held proudly, okay? It is superior to the law of Moses. The tablets, you know what the church is holding? The tablets. This is one of the tablets, and there's the other one behind her back. She's holding the luchot, right? They're hidden behind her back. It's like she's ashamed of the tablets. She won't hold them up. She's holding them down and hiding them behind her back. Now, what does that tell you? Again, anytime you look at this image, the imagery itself says, the conclusion is very simple. You're enjoying the art and you're saying, well, the church is better than the synagogue in many, many ways. And so Christianity, it's got to be a better faith, because that's what it's showing. The church is triumphant, victorious, confident. Synagogue is miserable, downcast. In every way, you say, I want to be like this, I don't want to be like that. Yes, sir.
What's interesting is that when, just as a side note, as I said
Go
earlier,
ahead.
when the bubonic plague swept through Europe, the Jews were often sort of the scapegoat. They would say they're poisoning the wells, they're caught, because they buried their dead relatively swiftly, so they were unaffected by it. But Strasbourg, where that is, had one of the largest pogroms during the Black Death of any place in Europe.
Yeah.
They gathered, there's paintings of it, they gathered them outside the city and just burned them on a heap.
Yeah.
Alive.
Yeah.
Took their wealth.
It,
was horrible.
the history is painful, and so I just want you to realize this is 14th century sculpture. I mean, most of the people are illiterate at that moment, and what they're going to learn is from sculptures like this, from the paintings, from the sculptures, from the art, from the songs. That's what they're going to learn. And if you go inside the Strasbourg Cathedral, you actually see the architecture. I mean, there's not an empty space on the wall. It's like a book, except it's all a picture book because it's all done in statues of different people that are, you know, I'll have stories to go with it. And so I can just point to one of those statues and start telling you the story, right? Without having to know how to read. So it's a very powerful way to communicate. Art communicates in a very impactful way. Sometimes we don't even realize it. So, the theology that such art communicates was developed during the early patristic period when Christians basically sought to define themselves, and they wanted to represent themselves as a better alternative to Judaism, again, to Romans, right? We're trying to get Romans to embrace us, so we know Romans don't like Jews, so we might as well be different. In fact, we're better. So that's the presentation. The idea of new and better identity, competitive superiority, becomes really central and endures into the modern time. Because guess what? They're still building churches with these imagery. Not so much in the 20th and 21st century, but here's one from 19th century. This is just another church, another cathedral in France. You can see the same exact picture. What do you see here? Crucifixion. And here's the church statue, and here's the synagogue statue. Same motif. She's still got the law tablets in her hand, kind of hiding. Her staff is broken. Her head is down. The church is triumphant. In fact, you know, there's a little bit of passage that we read today about the side being pierced and blood and water flowing today from John. There it is, right there, depicted on that picture. Here's the blood and water drawn straight into the Eucharist cup. So this is it. This is straight out of the Gospel of John. We just read that today. Okay? So you have to understand that this imagery basically creates a theology, creates a theological understanding. And so theological anti-Judaism is a reading of John's Gospel, and it should be a legitimate concern for us. Because people read the Gospel and they say, our Scripture really justifies our belief. And our belief is that Christianity is a much better religion than Judaism in every way possible. So here's the problem. Why in the world do we even have this anti-Judaism? And why specifically in the Gospel of John? What's the big deal about John? Well, the problem is this. And if I can just summarize it, this is it. John's Gospels, in most English translation, uses the term the Jews, or Judaioi, about 60 to 70 times. In fact, the passage that we read today, okay, from the Bema, it says, and the Jews asked for their bones to be broken. But Yeshua was already dead, so his bones didn't have to be broken, so they pierced his side, right? The Jews asked. Who? Who the Jews? The problem is that you have most of the time, the Jews, okay, that term, hoyudaioi, indicates the enemies of Jesus who first opposed him, argued with him, then actively sought to kill him. Just read the Gospel of John. The Jews are seeking to kill him. It says straightforward, okay? So the problem is this, that in other Gospels, Yeshua has problems with different people. They disagree, they argue, okay? They have a little bit of a name-calling going on. But in every one of those Gospels, you have the Sadducees or the Pharisees or the scribes, some particular group that he is at one point or another disagrees with on something. The Sadducees come to him and he tells them off. Or the Pharisees come to him and he tells them off. So there's a conflict. But you see, in the Gospel of John, every time the conflict that exists, it's with the Jews. Which makes it sound like we're talking that Jews, in general, as a people, in whole and in mass, are the opponents of Jesus. It also makes it sound that the Gospel of John is actually not a Jewish writing, not even written by a Jew. That's what it makes it sound. Because when you read the Gospel of John, and it says, and the Passover of the Jews was coming to be, right? Well, what other kind of Passover do we have? You know, the Passover of the Chinese was right around the corner. I'm like, that makes no sense, right? You know? The Passover of the Irish, that's not there, right? So why would the Gospel of John says the Passover of the Jews? It's like me saying, me writing a story right now and saying, the American Thanksgiving holiday was right around the corner. Well, that immediately would make you think that I'm a Canadian writing about it, because who else has Thanksgiving except Americans and Canadians, right?
So it could be just referring to just the Judeans, because maybe the Essenes were doing it at a different time.
Good point. Good point. And so the question is, why does John use a language like that? But regardless of whether you and I can answer why, which I think we should, the problem is, what it sounds like to an outsider is that the Jews are a separate group, and this guy named Jesus running around with a bunch of his disciples is not. That's what it sounds like. And that is the problem. So this is where you can create anti-Judaism, essentially, out of this gospel, because it lends itself. It makes it easy to make it that way, because the way things are translated. So the phrase that we have a problem is hoidaioi, which literally does mean the Jews. It is a good literal translation. What it means is a different story. But this is the kind of passages that would make a person read the Gospel of John and basically decide that the Jews are bad news. Read this. This is John chapter 8. Just follow along with me. I abbreviated a little bit. If you are Abraham's children, contingent, not you are, if you are Abraham's children, do the deeds of Abraham. But it is that you are seeking to kill me. So there you go. See? You're Abraham's children. You say Abraham's children. You're seeking to kill me. A man who has told you the truth, which I heard from God, this Abraham did not do. Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me, for I proceed forth and come from God. For I have not even come in my own initiative, but he sent me. Keep going. You are of your father the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning. He does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. He who is of God hears the words of God. For this reason, you do not hear them, because you are not of God. So if I read this passage, and if I saw the art and the sculpture, and I'm already preconditioned and predisposed to think the church is much better and the synagogue is worse, and if I'm thinking Christianity is superior and Judaism is inferior, if these are the things that are running through my mind, when I read this passage, Jesus is talking to the Jews who are looking to kill him, and he says, you are not Abraham's children. Let's establish that, because you don't do what Abraham does. God is not even your father. You're even not God's children. You're not Abraham's children. You're not God's children, because God is not your father, because you would have loved me if he was your father. In fact, your father is the devil. You are the children of the devil. And now the last line is, you are not even of God. There's not God in you at all. Boom. This is not a triple punch. This is a quadruple punch. And I'm picking a pretty feisty set of verses from John 8. The problem is that this stuff is all over John. You can take passages like this all over the place and make them sound really bad.
So why would he write it like that?
Why would he write it like that? Good question. You need to ask John. I wish he was here. We would have asked him, why in the world did you write it like that? I'm pretty sure, this is one thing I'm confident about. If John ever knew that this is how people would use his words, he would have never written one line in his life.